Where are your minds and hearts at tonight? Even if you can't fit it into the topic of enjoyment. All right, Kate. Kate or John?
Yeah, it's me actually. And this actually is a question about meditation
Sure.
because I was noticing this evening, I had the thought during the meditation, and it's not unusual. But the thought I had was that it feels as though there is a kind of gravitational field in my mind which attracts thought, story, narrative. It's like, and it almost takes a kind of pressure to hold it back. And I feel like something there is not quite working. And anyways, I'd never had that image of gravity before that, oh,
Yeah, I like it.
it just happened.
It
Anyways, I
does.
just I
Yes.
offer that and I'm curious as to what you would have to say about that.
Sure. It's um, gravity is a good word to describe it. Thoughts just happen, don't they? You don't invite them. It's interesting when you put out the intention to not think, and you notice that. If you don't put out the intention not to think, you never notice that they just happen.
Mm.
They just happen on their own. And when you choose something other than thought to pay attention to, there's an effort to it, like escaping the gravity of one's thoughts, right?
Yes.
There's a little effort each time to notice the thought. And, thoughts generally kind of dissolve when you notice them. But there are some thoughts that seem to have a kind of stickiness to them. You almost want to think them. They're either sticky because you want to think them, or they're sticky because you don't want to think them and they bother you. And that's a different kind of stickiness, but both of them create stickiness, right? And so, you meditate over time, and through kind of just calming down, just kind of the body and mind settling, the thoughts get a little less frequent. There's maybe more moments of stillness. And if you went on a silent retreat where you weren't speaking, you weren't writing, you weren't reading, you weren't feeding the verbal conceptual part of your mind, that kind of stillness would get even deeper. So there's that whole thing. But one thing that I also want to add to that is there's an energy around thought, which I call being in love with thinking. That most human beings are in love with their thinking. They believe that thinking is where it's at. Thinking is where the good stuff happens. We often get paid for our thinking. It's also very entertaining at times. It's stimulating. And so our thoughts are like mediating the world all the time. And there's a sense in the human animal of kind of being in love with thinking. And our energy, even if you feel the energy often tends to be up in our heads, it stays there. I'm not sure it's as much in every culture like it is this one, but we've encouraged our energy to go into our heads through years of schooling, and it's kind of there often. So one aspect of meditative life, or meditative training, you could even say, is a process of falling out of love with thinking. So what do I mean by that? Falling out of love with thinking. If you don't discover the joy of non-conceptual presence, thinking has a much greater gravity to it than it does when you start to discover the joy of non-conceptual presence. When you discover the joy of non-conceptual presence, the ballast starts to shift. The ballast shifts toward really wanting silence. And I don't mean wanting in a craving way. It's actually like the heart starts to fall out of love with thinking and starts to fall in love with non-conceptual presence. Even like the presence that can watch thoughts arise and dissipate, and kind of get fascinated with that, with the fact that thoughts happen on their own. They disappear when you notice them. They have this kind of train that builds off itself. It's a really fascinating thing to watch. And even along with that, they're not yours. As strange as that might sound, thoughts aren't really yours. Simply because they happen on their own, they have their own. It's like this wave of intelligence is like going through and making connections and describing it verbally, and it's doing itself. It's kind of amazing. And non-conceptual presence can see that. It's a little awakening of sorts to really see that. And then maybe you drop into a deeper silence sometime in meditation where thoughts don't bother you, or they're quite wispy. And there's something your heart finds in that experience, some satisfaction that isn't in the thoughts. That's part of the falling out of love with thoughts. You're falling into love with the satisfaction of samadhi, which usually gets translated as concentration, but honestly, the word concentration just sounds like a lot of work, like holding the mind still. I don't necessarily mean samadhi in that sense. I mean rather the heart opening, the energies of the body opening up, the heart opening up in a full way is samadhi. And the heart opens up in presence. There are some thoughts that are heart opening. It's not as though thoughts and heart opening are complete opposites or allergy. The heart has an allergy to thoughts. But there's a different quality there to the presence that we are, which we can call the heart. And thinking becomes much slower, much more full of feeling, coming from a different place, a place full of value and connection. And quite unlike a lot of the thoughts that we struggle with in meditation, which are really more superficial, figuring it out thoughts, imagining thoughts, going to the future thoughts, going to the past thoughts. Goodness, there's so many possibilities of thinking right there. And yet when the energy really is in the heart, it's not like there has to be zero thinking, but it's a different quality of thinking. It's saturated with meaning and feeling in a different way. So anyway, that's what occurs to me when you talk about the gravity of the mind. There is a kind of gravity to our thoughts, and yet that gravity can weaken. And the ballast can actually shift. The ballast can shift towards presence and away from thinking. And I mention it because just knowing that there can be a process of falling out of love with thinking, it shifts it. It's not so much that thinking is just like, okay, notice the thought, come back to the breath. Notice the thought, come back to the breath. There's a certain way that meditation is taught that way, and you miss the heart of it. You miss the actual value that's being discovered in that movement away from conceptual thinking. If you know that, if you have a sense of, okay, can I begin to get to know non-conceptual presence, to enjoy it to even love it, that will begin to drain the thoughts of their gravity. All right?
Mark, thank you very much.
Okay, you're welcome. Thanks for asking the question. Do we have another taker? Another question. Another report from the front. Okay, let's see. We got Jennifer and then Wynn.
Hey.
Hi.
So in the last maybe 4 or 5 days, we've been moving our office space from an old office to a new office that was gutted and rebuilt. And so there's many vendors involved, electricians, plumbers, mill workers. And a lot of the people that are managing the project have dropped off. So I've been there every day. And I've gone from being a very present person without a lot of these types of jobs in my life to like a cussing sailor. And I'm not proud of it, but it's been so stressful. And I walk in the door and it's like I'm spinning, and I'm trying to think, how can I do that tomorrow and not, I mean, I must look like a real cussing sailor to everybody. I'm like, you know, everything is going wrong, and it is my money, so I'm a little bit like freaked out. And no one else seems to care. And I don't know how to find the calm in all this right now. Although that meditation was fabulous.
All right. So let me see what I can say about finding the calm in all of that. You know, what I think is happening is the part of the mind which we could call the anxious doer or the manager is like taken over and kind of freaking out, you know?
Yeah.
So what can be helpful is to notice that part of you, the manager. Because when you notice the manager, then you are being the greater presence, which you are, rather than not noticing the manager, which you're just kind of like the manager part, and the manager feels alone and overwhelmed. You know, so there's something that happens really, really wonderful in the mind when you're present with your own state. In this case, the freaked out manager, the anxious doer. Something really magical happens, and I sometimes talk about it like putting your hand on the shoulder of the part, like they're there. It's okay, because our managers. I'm talking about my own manager, really. My own manager can get freaked out, you know? Like, didn't think of something and then it went wrong, you know, and somehow there's a part of me that thinks it was supposed to have anticipated everything, and it's, you know, so that you can go down that road. And just about everybody I know has that capacity of mind to, like, be the anxious doer and just stepping out of it for even an instant and noticing it with compassion, you know, not judgment, not like, don't do that. That isn't going to be helpful. It's like stepping out of it and just putting your hand on it right after you've just been the swearing sailor and saying, you know, it's okay, and giving it some appreciation. I appreciate, this sounds really weird, but it works. I appreciate you for how hard you're working to, you know, stay in budget and get it done right. I feel how that you really care about that. And it's okay to relax. You can probably do this and relax a bit at the same time. So I will occasionally talk to myself in this weird way that I've sort of learned to, from a place of presence. And sure enough, something will like relax inside. the mind is made this way. It's a multiplicity of parts, different loops that interact, and a kind of core of presence, which can actually be a balm and a soothing force within the whole human system. And that arises because you notice the state you're in. Until you notice the state you're in, until you're really mindful of it in the moment, you have really not a lot of choice. But in the moment that you see it, you can begin to have a relationship with it. You can have a relationship with the state. And you can be a appreciative, soothing, compassionate presence along with it. And I think of it, almost like a separate person that feels like burdened and alone with all this responsibility. And suddenly when something else shows up that sees it, appreciates it, and is with it, it calms down. It's like a little inner relationship that mirrors the relationships we have with other people. Like when a friend suddenly sees you all wrapped up in something, and says, "Oh, there, Jennifer, it's going to be okay." Mm-hmm. And then suddenly, your whole nervous system kind of comes down and relaxes. The same thing is possible inside. Just that kind of presence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, tomorrow.
All right. Tell me how it goes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, Win.
But what I wanted to ask you about, Mark, was the grumpy old person syndrome, and I also think it's a neuroscience thing. It's like you get grumpy because you've had so many repetitions of certain things, whether it's things that happen while you're driving or waiting in line, or it's just like there's so many different things, and you reach a point in life where it just sort of you're saturated, like you're done. And so what's the prescription for that? Like, how do you approach that? Because I don't want grumpiness to be the dominant theme.
Yeah. I don't know if I see it the way you described it. That by nature, the repetitive things you do eventually saturate you and you're kind of done with them. Having been a meditator for 40 some years, 42 years, I have probably observed, I don't know how many breaths. And it's an incredibly repetitious thing, right? And I haven't gotten saturated yet. Certainly when I started out, I got bored with breathing, It was easy to do. I was more fascinated with my thoughts. It was hard. The body ached in a different way than it does now. Ached from the tension of all the unresolved stuff inside me. Anyway, the repetitiousness of itself didn't make it stop being enjoyable. If anything, some things actually deepened over time. And it could be I'm describing an activity that one can do resting, and maybe that just is better for old people. Watching the breath than shoveling the driveway. But anyway, I'm not sure that's true. I think it's more something in the mind that stops showing up for the activity, that stops investing itself in the daily activities of life. And that's a bit what I was encouraging you in my talk to do, is reinvest yourself in the ordinary. I don't know what all is involved with getting grumpy. or which is really just the increase of the mind state of aversion. And the danger of that increasing when the body doesn't feel as good, when things don't come as easily, when one gets tired more easily and recovers more slowly, all of which seems to be a part of aging, you know. And I know that when I'm tired, aversion comes so much more easily. You know, as soon as I'm tired, that grumpiness follows. When I'm not tired, then I'm less likely to be grumpy. Anyway, as I grow older, I will continue to observe this in myself. But, I mean, the mind is where we live 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And part of what I love about the Dharma is it points out that that's true. You live in the mind 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And if you don't keep it clean, it's going to start smelling. It's going to be like a crummy place to live after a while. And how do you clean the mind? What is the way that you clean the mind? Well, one of the ways is that you keep watch. You notice aversion, for example, arising. You notice that aversion is suffering. If you just let yourself go into aversive states, what are you doing other than creating more suffering for yourself? You're certainly not going to change the world the way it is. You're not going to stop snowstorms or shoveling. You could buy a condo. Okay, there are some options, but there will be other things that will tire you and so forth. So the general point of view that the Dharma offers is be aware of this tendency of the mind toward aversion, and in noticing it, can you actually turn towards a more wholesome state? In doing so, you let go of suffering and you abide in something that's satisfying and enjoyable instead. It's kind of like the Mind 101. And so I'm just aware that aging presents a new kind of challenge to that, really. Every age has its own kind of challenge. Aging, though, has the challenge of energy and comfort in the body as possible kind of contributors to this aversive state. And this aversive state being something which can make life unhappy. How's that? Take a shot at it.
Darn good. Darn
yeah.
good.
So I'll see you next week. And, maybe I always kind of give homework assignments. Notice your manager. See if you can develop a relationship with your manager this week. Unblend from him or her and explore that whole frontier. All right. Be well. Take care.